the way you look at things in mindfulness, if you tell people you do mindfulness, I do meditation. I have done so for many, many years, and I still get people, when I say I feel I need to meditate, look at me like I'm from a different planet, so to speak. But I would imagine many, many years ago, the same would have been the case for, going out for a run. So probably 50, 60 years ago, if you said to someone, I'm going out for a run, they probably would have looked at it in a funny sort of way. So mindfulness now is used across a broad range of areas, which we'll talk about, including in performance and well-being, and we'll sort of touch on the applications of mindfulness in the modern era we live in, which really needs to be adapted, I believe anyway. So how long has this stuff been around? Well, the reality is that mindfulness has its roots back in Hindu teachings from 3,500 years ago, which is before my time. Mindfulness concepts became part of Eastern contemplative practices starting in Buddhism around 535 BCE, and Western psychology eventually incorporated the principles of mindfulness, with the main distinction, the focus on results instead of the journey. So in Western secular mindfulness, there is almost like a result or an outcome, whereas in traditional Buddhism, it's more of a process. But I'll touch on that as we go along, and I've written about that in the manual too. So just to sort of reiterate, mindfulness developed from Buddhist roots into Western secular clinical application. The research suggests it's got a lot of benefits, which we'll touch on, including behavioural regulation and emotional reactivity. They're the sort of two key areas that the research points towards. So mindfulness, it consists of developing the ability to meditate, how you focus your attention, relate to experiences, how we relate to life, where we think we should be, expectation, suffering. So life has suffering. We suffer throughout life. Things come up. We have adversity throughout life. We experience certain situations. How we deal with these things, how we sometimes can suppress these things and try and push them away and resist and so on and so forth, that sort of constant battle in our mind. So the ability to meditate can be quite useful in those areas, because life will bring you suffering in the way we give life meaning. There's plenty of things also that distract your attention. Now, the world's a changed place. Some of you may be too young to realise there was a time there was none of that social media. We didn't have any of that. And the reason I, smile in jest is because that's all competing for attention. As well as everything else, I grew up in an era where we had, I think, 3 or 4 channels. Okay, you got home and you had 3 or 4 channels. Now, as well as about 3 billion channels on TV, you've got all these other things. Your mind is not getting a rest. Okay, and not that if you are resting, your mind is resting anyway, because the mind's always active, which we'll touch on. And it's really, really fascinating. So the point being is that, okay, who checks their social media in the evening? Who tends to, anyone in the group, and there's a sort of tendency, isn't there, to want to check and see who's doing what, who's wearing what, who's going on holiday. So the attention that you have is being competed for. So our attention, there's sort of vast amounts of platforms across so many areas. So the modern life, the modern world that we live in these days has become more and more a battle in the sense for your mind to be able to just rest and be. The human doing, human being. We've become human doings. Who feels comfortable sitting down for a period of time doing nothing, so to speak? Not that one cannot do nothing anyway. It's constantly the doing. So, rather than being and experiencing certain situations, and you see it all over, whether you experience an event, whether you go see a concert, whether you see, people are experiencing it from a second position, which is fine. I like to take photos and do streams and do all that stuff as well too, but equally it starts to become the focus of attention, okay, in adverse to just being in that sort of space where we just calm and peaceful, okay, not stewing over the past, what could have been, what should have been, not fretting about the future, the land of what if. Because what happens, anyone sort of ever used their phone, you got that predictive text, the land of what if, and you sort of start typing and it runs away from you. Before you got a chance, it starts predicting. And the mind is very good at doing that. It's very predictive. What if I lose my job? What if I do this? And what if this happens? And what if that happens? And what if that happens? And if you ruminate for a long period of time, what happens? There's evidence around that. Well, it starts affecting your mindset. Constant rumination is correlated with depression, albeit depression is, multifactorial. There's not one pathway, one thing. But equally, in saying that, it's not doing us any good. So for me, there's a substantial body of evidence to suggest mindfulness can assist pain relief, depression, anxiety. Not that I'm advocating that one should do mindfulness for that. One should always see a clinical expert in those areas to decide what they think is right. But there's not a lot of evidence in other areas of mental health, albeit we're seeing some mindfulness from what I can see, and people can enlighten me, spreading into eating disorders and psychosis, which we'll touch on very briefly. But equally in saying that, one should be an expert in their field, one would think in administration. So for me, it's also used outside empirical protocols by people of variable professional backgrounds, and expertise, teachers, sports coaches, managers. But equally in saying that, I don't think, in my opinion, say a teacher or a sports coach or a manager should be crossing the boundary to clinical. Certainly not. I think that wouldn't be a good idea at all if you were a teacher and you sort of decide you're going to treat the student depression. But what you could do is maybe help them with anxiety around examination or school or so on and so forth. It would be the first day back at school and so on and so forth. But that's another story for another day. But we see mindfulness can improve performance of individuals in teams and in the workplace. In leadership, it can be quite useful too. So if you've got a mindful leader who's very self-aware of self, very self-aware of others, it can be really, really useful. There's some evidence in the literature to suggest that people who are more mindful make better leaders, better managers, because they're more contemplative, they're more aware of self, they're less reactive, maybe more proactive, in a sense that, okay, you have a bad day, or something's gone on at home and you're not going to carry that into the workplace, or maybe you have a bad meeting and you're sort of carrying it on. Athletes, by focusing their attention on the present, actions and process in adverse to past mistakes and future outcomes and goals. So as an athlete, you focus on the now. What do I need to do now? Rather than, well, a few weeks ago, a year ago, I missed that penalty. Will it happen again? And if I miss the penalty, will we lose the cup final? If we lose the cup final, will I disappoint all the fans? And if I disappoint the fans, and this doesn't put us in a good place to execute the process. So that's where it can be quite useful from that point of view. And equally, the student, for example, the dissertation, you go to the outcome. If I fail the module, we'll have to retake it. Will it mean I won't get the job? Will it mean... And that can be a negative thing because we don't lose ourselves in the process. But that's perfectly normal, the brain to do that. That's the way it's wired, which we'll touch on, as well. But the reality is that we can improve our performance because people sort of think mindfulness, well, if I just be in the now, what about my goals, my dreams, my visions? What will I do? Well, the point being here is that you're in a better place to achieve those if you can be in the now. You're better placed to achieve it in the sense that, you sort of plant your seed and you work to the process and that puts you in a more productive state of mind, which is key. And think for a moment, sort of sometimes these things go back to beliefs we have about ourselves and others. And in mindfulness, we talk about empathy, which is another story from today. It's a big area, broad area, but I always think empathy starts with a sense of self, where we're probably our biggest critic. We've all done things that we probably regret doing and aren't proud of doing, but beating yourself up for doing it, it can sort of put you in a place of not being productive and moving forward. And equally insane, it can be really draining. It can be really draining to sort of be and carry the burden on your shoulders, so to speak, about things that haven't gone the way you want to go, and I shouldn't have done this, and I could have done that, and all these, the I narrative, which we'll touch on as we go along, because the I narrative is the big thing. The me, I. And if you listen to a conversation, you'll hear people say me and I considerably. And that's part of our wiring too. That can be problematic as well. What I'd like to say is I'm going to cover do some practical interventions today, and from the point of view, from an educational point of view. So I always say the aim is to make it as non-intrusive as possible, and you don't have to sit for an intervention if it's not for you. When I say intervention is just some meditations. But the point being is they're not designed to treat anybody who's sort of coming in and so on and so forth. That's all done in an intricate way and based on a formulation. But equally, if you're okay to do so, then you're more than welcome to join in when we do a meditation. If at any stage during the meditation you decide that it's not for you, then it's okay. You just leave it. But it's not designed to try and treat anybody and so on and so forth. It's just to give you an experience, because that's one we learn. Mindfulness. But going back to what we said earlier before, now I'm not a clinical expert, and I mentioned that mindfulness is spreading in different areas, and traditionally pain relief and depression and anxiety. So we're seeing it. I'm not a clinical expert in psychosis, but if someone asked me, emailed me, I covered this on an advanced module as part of a course I did, and on that module they talked about the work of Chadwick, who incorporates mindfulness with psychosis, and he talks about how it can be quite useful. And if something that takes your interest, if you're a clinician, and you might want to see the work he does, but do bear in mind psychosis is very complex, and it's associated with various mental health disorders such as schizophrenia. So there is concerns about mindfulness with patients with psychosis, by the way. But equally, in saying that, the work by Chadwick, he talks about how he adapts it, the duration of the meditations and so on and so forth. And I'm sure he's if you see his papers and his work, he's in a better position to talk about his work than what I am. And other work by Louise Attell talks about how the delivery method, adapting it to the people that you're working with is key. And that sort of goes across a broad range of area. You really want to adapt mindfulness for the people that you're working with, which is key. But that's sort of, for the people who emailed me around the area of psychosis, then me not being an expert in that area clinically, but having done a module on psychosis and also having covered that on one of the modules I did on mindfulness, then that's probably where you want to go if you're a clinician and you're sort of contemplating delivering that going forward. So the two main protocols you've probably heard of mindfulness are MBSR, and there's a lot of evidence around that. That's Kabat-Zinn. So there's a huge body of evidence behind that, and it's extensively studied, particularly in the USA. And MBSR derives from Buddhist philosophy. Because of time, I don't really have the time to go into the philosophy, because there's a lot of, there's various Buddhist philosophies, but we sort of think Zen, meditation, and sort of you got the Kabat-Zinn, MBSR, a lot of evidence around that. And you also got MBCT, which is designed and developed by Siegel, Teasdale, and Williams. According to Siegel, Williams and Teasdale, MBCT blends mindfulness with CBT and is primarily used in application of depression. According to Teasdale, mindfulness can assist patients with depression and anxiety by the relationship they have with their thoughts, being able to emotionally regulate and reduce rumination. As I said earlier before, one should always seek, in my opinion and my suggestion, help of the clinician if they have got a diagnosis in adverse to sort of doing it on their own, because they can decide if that's the way forward. But there's a lot of evidence around that being useful in those areas, but I think it should be administered, in my opinion, by the appropriate professional. Here we're sort of going to touch on, we can sort of touch on subclinical areas, but we can also touch on performance and how it can relate to performance academically, in sport, in business as well. But there's always that fine line between clinical and performance, and I think it's really, really important, if in doubt, to see a clinician first, in my opinion anyway. But MBSR and MBCT are carefully designed structured programs, and they've got a lot of similarities with all the contrast, which I don't have time to go into, but the manual I wrote, if you haven't got already, has all that in there, and it's quite useful to have an idea. That's not to say it's the only way. This stuff has been, meditation has been around for thousands of years, and a lot of the meditation that I learned as well has been, the Buddhist philosophy. But equally, I think there needs to be a degree of adaptation. So why study it? I think that from the point of view I think it's important that there is evidence around that, because obviously through that we can sort of decide what works, and going forward, it sort of helps the development of it moving forward. But another area that's quite useful I touched on is stress. So the ability to react instinctively and expediently to threatening situations is thought to be linked to evolutionary development of human beings, not only by triggering reactions in the sympathetic nervous system, but our cognitive process as well. So in years gone by, you're having to react instinctively to the appropriate behavioural response. So if you're being chased by a tiger, your response is going to be to run. Or maybe you'll fight, or maybe you'll freeze, but you have these various responses. But from the point of view that you've got this instant response, but you've also got this response where you process it through the more modern part of the brain that decides, do I keep this threat activation going, in the sense that do I sort of am I okay now to disengage? Because you might have heard a knock on the door in the evening, and you think, well, who could that be? And you sort of sense danger, and as you're walking down the stairs, you sort of start to think, well, actually, it could be, a family member coming home. It could be, you left the door unlocked. It could be, maybe some kids playing knocking around. It could be a number of things, really, until you get there and you realise, actually, the door was open, and there's a gust of wind, and the door, but then you realise you're okay, everything's safe, no one. So the point being, so you've got our primal brain that's very instinctive in that sense, but you've also got this modern brain, which is quite evaluative as well, and processes information too. And we'll sort of touch on it very briefly, but I've written a lot about that in the manual in terms of our stress response. But so it's perfectly normal. But equally saying that the dangers we had all those years ago, we don't have now. So you don't have, lions and, these sort of animals roaming the world, but you've still got danger, and you've still got things that we react to, as well as more around the structure of the world that we live in. Because, we've all got deadlines to meet, we've all got, with bills to pay, and all these things that go on, and the brain kind of doesn't really recognise that's not the same danger as you would have faced all those years ago for evolutionary history, when you're being chased by a predator or prey, so to speak. So I think the thing is really is the effects of stress is okay in moderation, all things in moderation, but elevated levels of the stress hormone cortisol aren't good. For starters, they interfere with learning and memory and have many negative effects on physical health and increase the risk of depression, and mental health. So chronically being in this sort of survival mode isn't a good place to be. Hence, sometimes I'll just switch the TV off and news and sort of avoid any invasion on my senses that's going to cascade a response that's beyond my control, because you could argue, well, I can appraise it, but equally insane, it's happening so quick that this invasion on your emotions escalates, and this sort of secretion of the stress cortisol hormone cortisol isn't great. Now, I'm not a medical person, and I profess to be an expert in the area, but I've certainly done enough study in the brain to recognise, and I've worked in business and sport, the effects even on performance, because I work with teams who've asked me for advice on after Champions League football, the cortisol's high, and what can we do in adverse to what they're already doing? And I was okay, maybe perhaps mindfulness, hypnosis could be a useful thing. You've ever tried it, or like all these things, but sort of touching on the pathology, because you've got people interested in this area, you'll see that stress affects the hippocampus part of the brain, and cortisol can damage the hippocampus as well, and it can damage the hippocampus in producing new cells and structure, according to research by Kim Pelvin. There's a lot of research out there. The research by Postolova talks about how the hippocampus atrophy. It gets smaller in the correlation, and has a correlation to several psychopathologies, psychosis, depression, Alzheimer's even. Stress has a correlation to atrophy in the hippocampus, and atrophy in the hippocampus has a correlation to these conditions. Now, like I said, I'm not a medical person, but I'm coming at it from an angle of my research in the brain, that a small hippocampus also is linked to these pathologies too. Is that only because of stress? Well, my suspicion is no. There's many variables, genes and environment, but equally in saying that, it makes a point to work on stress. Mindfulness is proven to work well with stress, not for everybody, but there is a body of evidence to suggest that, and the evidence suggests that people who meditate have a high density of grey area in the hippocampus, according to a number of research, Luz et al. So they talked about the higher grey density, so in the left region of the hippocampus and the right subiculum. Now, people who meditated for a significant period of time compared to non-meditators, so there could be a case of meditating. So we've seen with research by Chembrowski, the subiculum has an integral role in the flow of information processed in the hippocampus. Amongst other functions, it's important in how people respond to stress too. So, okay, meditation helps you to respond to stress as well. The subiculum has a correlation to memory. The bigger the volume, the better the memory. So you can see a bit of a pattern emerging here from that point of view, and that sort of gives you an idea, because some people asked about that. But we can sort of go after stress, and you can have the slides, and you can sort of have some things I post some articles. I write some articles in ResearchGate. You can go on and read for what they're worth, and I'm sure other people can write better than me. But you can sort of see that, and see that stress is a problem in not just the world we live in now. It's always been a problem, but I think the world that we're living in now, as much as we like to think it's probably as good as it has been in many respects, as most people eat and have a roof over their head, and if you look at the conditions 100 years ago, it was damn tough. Well, a lot more tougher than what it is now in many respects, because people worked longer hours and labour was harder. But equally, we're living in a society now, there's a lot more invasion in the senses, one could argue. And that's probably going to cause us problems. And if you look at the correlation, the depression, anxiety, now I'm not suggesting it's by no means down to any of this, but it's on the rise. And it doesn't look like it's coming down soon, anytime soon. But equally in saying that, I don't want to speak loosely of depression and anxiety, because I'm sure there's many pathways to both conditions, which aren't just psychological and sociological, biological too. So, and that's another story for another day. But, you know, we look at the research of a sustained period of time, practicing mindfulness demonstrates a reduction in neurodegeneration. Though, you know, before we sort of jump the gun here and start saying, yeah, I'm going to do mindfulness and it's going to help with neurodegeneration, there's other factors too. Genetics, gender, environment, experiences and pathology. So, you know, there's not one pathway. I'm not suggesting that reductionistically I'm going to do this and that's going to help with that. But there is mileage there. Okay? There is some mileage for that. And, you know, there is some mileage for practicing mindfulness. Okay? So, you know, it's one of them really, with all these things, you've got to be wary with all the evidence, because obviously, you know, those of you who know about, you know, research studies will know that, like all these things, are up for interpretation, and there's many factors involved and variables involved, and one person can say one thing and one another. But there is enough research to say that, you know, certainly mindfulness helps with stress, and there's enough research to say that stress can be a bad thing in excess. But equally in saying that, you know, we can see from what we've mentioned there that mindfulness does have a correlation with grade density and volume of the regions in the hippocampus by a homeostatic regulation of the stress response, because the body knows what to do. In one respect, you know, your body knows what to do, how to heal itself. You cut yourself, you know, you don't heal. If the cut's not too bad, you might need to go get some stitches, but generally speaking, it knows what to do in that respect. So perhaps giving the mind a break, in one sense, can be a useful thing. However we sort of, you know, frame it, we talked about earlier. So according to the research, conscious interventions have their limitations. Mindfulness can potentially help with the mind's automatic attention regulation. So I know, okay, that, you know, consciously I know some of the answers, but equally there's the other part of the mind that we sort of talk about as well that doesn't respond in the same way. So you get a bill coming through the post, or you fail an exam, or, you know, you have an argument with somebody, and you could have sort of know, but equally in saying that, you kind of either suppress it, you try and reappraise it. Now, suppression is not a good thing. So Sigmund Freud, I wasn't around then, but if you read some of his papers, he talks about suppression not being a good thing. He was right, because suppression is useful only in the interim, but then it gets worse. So it's a bit like the analogy is, if you leave rotten food in the fridge, it's going to damn and infect everything else. So if you try and suppress a certain situation, it can cause you problems in the long term. And that's as much as we know, or I know anyway in the research, but equally reappraisal can be useful, but what's really important is in the way we do reappraisal, there's got to be a sense of control, understanding what one is doing. Because equally, when you're reappraising a situation, what's evident is how you're reappraising it. So, you know, you sort of look at the proportion of the event. So perhaps someone cuts me up on the road when I'm driving, and all things said and done, I'm still stewing over it until eventually I sort of sit down and I'm okay. Or perhaps I go for a walk at lunchtime tomorrow and my friend walks straight past me and I start to think, have they fallen out at me? Then I go back and I speak to the resident therapist in the back of the room, and they say, well, they might not have seen you. So that probably can work well, but equally, if the reappraisal in proportion to the situation is just far too big, then that might be a problem. You know, and you might think, well, actually, I'm not ready to do this yet. So as much as reappraisal is evidence around the effectiveness of it, and it's used in some forms of the MBCT form of mindfulness, no doubt, equally in saying that, we can see how, you know, there is also the pitfall of that going forward. So thinking about this here, the sense of self, help us to create a more experiential view of the sense of self, in adverse to a static view of the self can be useful in mindfulness. So the sense of me, you know, who am I? who is anybody? Who are you? Do you ask yourself that question? Who exactly am I? It's a very deep question for a Wednesday evening. But who am I? And we attribute so much to ourselves. The I narrative. The I, the me. How could you do that to me? I can't believe that. The narrative that runs through our mind, and it becomes static rather than flow. So if I hit my hand on here, okay, I might feel it, but it's going to subside. So unless I focus on the emotion, it's going to flow. But if I if I focus on it, then it becomes a feeling and then a mood, and it sort of carries on. Then I wake up in the morning, I don't know why I'm angry, but sometimes anyone ever stuck in a sort of mood you can't get out of. So there's a case for, if you practice it, you're going to get better at it in one respect. So sometimes not fighting it, letting it just flow can be a useful thing too in that respect. So mindfulness can help us create a more fluent, balanced sense of self, which can assist in regulation of emotion and governance of behaviours, which can potentially have benefits during and beyond meditations. Okay, now that the therapist in the back of the room said my friend might not have seen me, I start to feel a bit better. Then I start to think, well, maybe they did see me. And I called the therapist and said, well, actually, I think they might have seen me. Well, the therapist says this to me, well, actually, if they did, can you control their action? No, I can't. Well, I realised, well, perhaps they've got their reasons. I disengage from the sense of self. I disengage from all the practicalities and permutations. I start to think, well, actually, you know what? It's okay. It's okay not to feel okay, but it's going to subside at some point, if that sort of makes sense. But how I feel impacts my behaviour. If I'm angry, I'm going to respond differently. So if I feel I've been ignored or ghosted, as the term is these days, I might send a scathing text saying, why did you ignore me for? But equally insane. I think they might have their reasons. Or if I think, well, actually, what they might have seen me, then my state's going to affect my behaviour. And I'll say, you're okay. Now, all that said and done, let's be practical here. I'm not implying that, you do meditation and all of a sudden you're this sort of Zen monk, I'm okay with all things, said and done. And one time I was delivering a course on mindfulness. She was a lovely woman in her 60s, and I think she had teenage grandkids, and she said, when she first asked me about mindfulness for teenagers, I thought she meant for her teenage grandkids. At that point, I said, well, I can send you some information on that. Obviously, the maturation of the brain of the teenager doesn't happen until 23, 24. So they feel what you feel as an adult, but the maturation of the brain's not there. The way they process the events, and that's been proven scientifically, a lot of evidence around that, which I won't go into, but I don't have time to go into, but certainly the process a situation is not the same as one would do as an adult. That said, some adults act like teenagers, and me for one at times. But the point being, she said that she wanted for teenagers, and I thought, well, maybe it might be for a teenager. I'll send you a PDF. And little I realised not long after that, she meant for herself, coping with teenagers. I said, well, there's not a trick in the mindfulness book for doing that. Teenagers hit buttons, triggers in the brain that mindfulness might not work. It's just the way it is. So, all things said and done, I'm saying that, you are going to get triggered. We all do. It's just the way it is, the way the brain works. Just practice it and get better at it. And go back to empathy. Don't be too hard on yourself. Now, I'm not saying, carte blanche, go out there and tell people off and send nasty emails and text people. But sort of think, how can I improve? And sometimes the self-narrative is quite useful, because I've seen the best people in customer services, and when I train customer service staff, one thing I look at is the ones who don't take it personal and disengage from the persona are the ones who generally feel better. They're not as mentally exhausted. And by the way, there is a case to burning yourself out, in the sense that you're sort of always consumed on the outcome, on the goal that we talked about earlier. You can burn yourself out. Because it's great to have goals and plan, but equally, if you consume yourself on the outcome, you become this negative perfectionist. Now, perfectionism is really good, and I've been around a lot of perfectionists in sport, business, and academics, and you could argue I am that way inclined myself in certain areas of my life, but it can also burn you out too, because then you start worrying what everyone else thinks of you and how I come up to standard. And that can be a bad thing, that the label negative perfectionism and other labels too. So being able to disengage from that is quite useful too, as well. So the two basic approaches for developing mindfulness are experiential learning and meditative practices. Experiential practice of mindfulness involves focus on awareness and observation while engaged with an activity. Now, mindfulness allows yourself to quieten the mind and diffuse thoughts and feelings by focusing on the present moment, which is easy to do, especially if you've not done it before. And do we have innate qualities? Well, my suspicion is some people might be more wired to doing that. Genes environment. But one thing to bear in mind, I would say, is in my experience, people who've got health anxiety. Now, if they've got health anxiety, then there's a very good chance, because mindfulness, you focus on your bodily sensations a lot. Now, if you've got health anxiety, what do you think worries you more than anything? Bodily sensations, because obviously, that's the source of rumination. So you're telling someone to sit there and be mindful, and they start to become aware of the sensations of the body. Now, the sensation could be something to worry about. I'm not saying it's not. I mean, sensations are there for a reason. But let's say all things being well, they've been to a doctor, got it all checked out, and it's okay, and so on and so forth. But they've got, a high degree of health anxiety, and you're saying, well, focus on the body sensation, then that can sort of cause a negative effect, because they start worrying about that pain in the knee. Is it this? Is it that pain in the shoulder? So on and so forth, that pain, whatever. And the point being is that these sensations flow, just like emotions. And what I do in those situations, all things being well, because pain is something that needs to be investigated, is I say focus on the sound, because that sort of distracts you from the body, if that's worrying you going forward, if that sort of makes sense. It doesn't have to necessarily be a sensation. And I think for me, what's really important too is, I think what's really important as well is to bear in mind that from this point of view, and there's many things I read in the manual about, meditation. Some people say there's no such thing as a bad meditation. Well, there is really, because some people who might have post-traumatic stress might not be comfortable sitting there. And post-traumatic stress is, in my opinion, quite controversial, because how do you define it? Is it one event? Someone went to, fight in a war or got caught up in a traffic accident? Or is it prolonged domestic abuse or, childhood? So it can be quite difficult in that respect, but equally someone who's got that might not be comfortable just being, and equally some people just might not work for them. But equally some people might think that they're going to do a meditation and it's going to solve all the world's problems for them. They're going to sort of sit there for half an hour and come back. And sometimes if you're not taking that time out for a while, you can have like minor reactions. And certainly in my experience, you might feel a bit woozy, a bit disorientated, or something like that. But for the whole, I think it's quite non-intrusive, in the respect that I think that, for those of you who, practice it, I think, I would always suggest that the person you're working with, if they, at any point they can come out of it, there's no need to sort of see it through, it's okay. And sometimes when I do mindfulness myself, and I've done meditation for many, many years, there are times that I can do it really well, and I can go for an hour or two and I'm fine, and there are times that after a minute or two, it's not happening. Okay? But one thing that is for sure, and I won't have time to touch on this evening, it is in the manual, there are various stages of the meditations you use, and I sort of try to highlight that in the manual I wrote, so you're aware of sort of, one meditation focusing on one thing first and one beyond that. But equally in saying that, the way the brain's structured, I suppose all things said and done, it's your call to decide, what works for you and doesn't work for you. And certainly if you sort of meditate and you struggle with it, then that's okay. It's okay, there's nothing wrong with that. I wouldn't be disheartened and disappointed if that happens. Now then, before we break, I sort of got lost in time myself there, because I normally start a certain time, but because of the traffic this evening, I think we'll do a quick meditation before we break. How we do it for times? 10 to. Okay. So we'll do a meditation, and after the meditation we'll have a break, and then we'll come back and we'll be more practical going forward. So we'll sort of go forward. So I'll sort of take this down so you can sort of, it's not the light, you're not sort of focusing on there. Okay. Now, the first thing is, if you want to close your eyes, you can. You don't have to if you're not comfortable closing your eyes. Entirely up to you. It's your call. It's a safe environment here. So we'll do a gentle meditation. And as we do the meditation, just sort of checking with your posture. Your feet on the floor, your back on the chair, your breathing, and just notice any sensations. So there's no need to control anything at the moment, or any point for that matter. It's generally just getting into a comfortable, reasonably alert position. And perhaps notice your shoulders, your neck, your back, your feet on the floor, your back on the chair. Just adjusting the posture. And perhaps you notice some sensations in the body. And as you notice these sensations in the body, just let them flow. And become aware of your breathing. As you become aware of your breathing, just notice your breathing. Breathing in, breathing out, the pause in between breaths. Just becoming aware of your breathing. So, as you breathe out, you can't get that breath back, it's gone. If you're thinking about the next breath, the only breath you can take is the one you have now. So centering ourselves to the now for our breathing, and releasing any tension, and staying with the breath. So perhaps you experience some tension in the body, and just letting it flow. And if you're struggling, no need to be hard on yourself or beat yourself up. Your mind's wandering, that's what the mind does. The mind wanders. And just stay with your breath as the mind wanders. And breathe in air into any areas of tension. So perhaps you've got tension from walking all day or walking around the day, and just breathing into your feet, or perhaps your calves or your shoulders, or perhaps you've been watching a computer screen all day. A little bit of tension in your neck or in the eyes, and just breathing in some fresh air and just being aware of your breathing. And let any thoughts and feelings and sounds flow in the background of your awareness. So just like physical sensations come and go and flow, any thoughts and feelings will come and go, and just letting them fade in the background. And if the mind gets caught up, just use your breathing to ground your awareness. You can use your breathing to ground your awareness. And you can do this as well, by the way, if at any point during the day you get overwhelmed, or a little bit overwhelmed, or you get a little bit uptight about something, then you can do that if you will. Just ground yourself to your breathing, and perhaps even sort of place your hand on your tummy and just breathe and center yourself to that. Okay, and just gradually coming back. Okay, just gradually coming back. How's everyone feel? Okay? You're all okay? Okay, fantastic. So we'll do another meditation as a short one. So we'll sort of practice another one. We'll have a short break and we'll sort of carry on with the practical theme after the break. Is everyone okay to do another meditation? So if at any point you feel uncomfortable, then you're okay to go for a walk or do whatever, or just sit there passively, whatever works for you. It's okay. Just work at a pace that's comfortable for you and going forward. So perhaps again, if you're okay to close your eyes, you can. It's entirely up to you, but starting with your posture again, just sort of your posture and adjusting your feet and getting into a comfortable position, comfortable to you and reasonably alert and aware, and just adjusting your shoulders and your feet, and perhaps you notice the back on your chair and your feet on the floor, and sort of just adjusting your posture. And as you do that, perhaps you notice some sensations in the body and maybe even some sounds in the background. And any sensations in the body, just let them flow. And if you're more comfortable focusing on the sound, you can focus on the sound in the background. And at this point, use as an opportunity to get out of your own head and just focus on your breathing. So rather than thinking about the past or rather than thinking about the future, let go of the events that have happened throughout the day and put to one side tomorrow. So perhaps you've got deadlines tomorrow, perhaps you've got things to do, perhaps you're thinking about things that happened today or in the past, and just getting out of your own head by focusing on your breathing. And as you focus on your breathing, you become present in your body, slowing the mind down, breathing. Perhaps you've got thousands of fragmented thoughts circling in your mind, and letting them flow rather than resisting them or challenging them. Just letting them go like on a conveyor belt, or perhaps like watching them flow down a waterfall. Letting them go, centering yourself to your breathing, and just release the tension and breathing in air to any areas of tension. So perhaps you've got a bit of tension on your feet, on your calves, on your back or shoulders. Just breathe some air into that sort of tension or areas of tension. As you breathe in the air in areas of tension, become aware of sensations and anything that over the past few days in your mind that you think might have been unfair or unjust. Just allow yourself to experience the feeling, or perhaps you feel that you treated somebody else. Perhaps you might have snapped at someone or had a go at someone, you felt bad for doing it, remorseful, or perhaps someone had a go at you and you're still stewing over it. Just allow yourself to bring the experience, the feeling that the memory brings or situation brings. And just be with it for the time being. And open to experience without changing or resisting any feelings. And notice where the feelings are in the body and any thoughts. Just let them flow. So rather than challenging them or resisting them, just be open to experiencing them. And holding the thoughts in the space of awareness, the narrative. You become aware of the story. Are you blaming yourself or somebody else? Are you the victim? Are you using the I narrative, the me narrative? Are you trying to change what's happened? Is it a recurring pattern that happens? Or a theme? a narrative or a story. Notice the story and just hold that in the space of awareness and just explore. And it's okay not to be okay. Be okay for not being okay, and just hold what you're comfortable holding and notice the internal dialogue. And hold them in the space of awareness the same way as sensations in your body. Just aware, just notice as they pass, arise, through the mind and dissolve back in your awareness. Explore the relationship between the feelings and thoughts that arise and how this reflects on your body sensations. What happens to you? Any strong feelings about the situation? You just stay with the body's sensations and let them flow. So just like the body sensations, the feelings, the emotions flow. And being okay with that and holding them in your awareness. Observing the whole cascade. Observe the cascade as if you're watching a movie, fully present to what's going on, fully aware, but not taking it as entirely real, just images, passively watching a film. You're watching the situation unravel. And the experience that passed through the mind, and that pass. And before we end this practice, just remind yourself that you can return to this mindfulness awareness whenever you have a strong feeling throughout the day, if it's appropriate. Maybe a mildly stressful situation or personal interaction, you can just bring yourself back into the now, into the moment. And instead of being carried away by the feelings and the stories that arise, just reconnecting to the body and breath and seeing what happens if you're just mindfully aware of the experience as it unfolds in real time. So you can then choose more of a conscious choice, irrespective of the strength of the experience. Even if you feel like it's starting to overwhelm you, you can choose your response rather than react to certain moments. And you can experiment with this as well. So as you sort of make your way back to the here and now, we'll have a short break. So is 10 minutes okay for everybody? Okay, we've got a couple of more meditations we'll do after the break, and perhaps you want to have a stretch, and we'll sort of open for questions after the break as well. So yeah, have a 10-minute stretch, and we'll sort of come back after the break. Do come back, you've got to come back.